Hi, good afternoon, and welcome back to another Job Train How Talent session. I'm Giles, will be your guide for today, and thank you for joining us as we explore how to produce or foster really positive partnerships with your hiring managers. It's not always a marriage made in heaven, recruiters and hiring managers, and that's been made all the more complicated through the pandemic when we're suddenly thrown into the world of remote work, where we've got to up our game around communication, engagement, education, and a lot of pre-planning, especially through the hiring process. So mindful of that, we've put together a really great panel for you today from our friends over at Omni. So we've got Louise joining us, we've got Rick, we've got Claire, and we've got Katie as well. So over the next 45 minutes, we're going to hopefully turn it from perhaps an unhappy marriage to one that is blissful by answering all and any of your questions. We've thought of a few of our own areas to cover, but do please pop any questions you've got into the Ask the Questions bit at the bottom of the screen if you're on Crowdcast. We should also be live on LinkedIn, on Twitter and YouTube. So if you're watching there or on Crowdcast, please do pop a little response just to let you know that you can hear me okay. And then I will invite Louise on screen, who will do a little bit of an intro. Can you hear me all right? Just wait to see if anybody's there. While I'm doing that, I will just go and see if I can find Louise. Great, thank you, Julie. Right, I'm going to invite Louise on screen now, and then we'll get the rest of the crew on for you. Just while Louise is coming on, we've also created a little poll down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Do pop your responses in there. We'd love to hear your feedback on that. And yeah, Louise, hi, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Welcome.
Yeah, good, thank you very much. Lovely to see you again.
Good, it's nice to be able to hear you this time. So for everybody's benefit, we do little tests before we do these sessions. And last time I could see Louise brilliantly, but not hear anything. So hopefully everything will work well for the rest of the panel. I haven't run a panel session on one of our sessions before. It's a first for us. Anything could happen, anything could go wrong, it may do, so just bear with us if it does. But anyway, Louise, while I go and find the rest of your crew, would you like to introduce yourself and Omni to everybody on today's session?
Certainly, thank you very much. Hi everyone, so I'm Louise Shaw, I'm the Director of Resourcing Transformation at Omni RMS. Just a quick intro into Omni. So we are a resourcing transformation specialist. So we work with organisations to change how they resource for the better. We have 4 key service streams. The first one and the largest part of our business is we work as an RPO, or recruitment process outsourcing company, and also a managed service provider as well. So that means that we work behind loads of client brands. Ofcom is one of our new clients we're just working with to implement at the moment, which is really exciting for us all. And we essentially are their internal acquisition team. We go out as their brand, you wouldn't know it's Omni. In addition to that, me in particular, and also Katie, who you're going to be meeting this afternoon, we work in our resourcing transformation team. Here she is, perfectly timed. And Katie and I work with both in-house talent acquisition teams as well as our own. We probably spend about 50% of our time doing both. And that's where we get involved in anything to do with hiring manager experiences, selection design, workforce planning, and really helping organisations think about how they shift the professionalism and the maturity we talk a lot about of their resourcing. And today I am joined by my colleagues who I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. So Katie works with me in the resourcing transformation team. And we're also joined by Rick and Claire, who work more directly on our delivery team, which in normal language means the RPO MSP side of the business. So Katie, I'm going to pass over to you to say a quick hi.
Hello everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear loud and clear, all good.
Good. Really excited to be joining the session today. As Louise said, I work with Louise on the resourcing transformation team, helping talent acquisition teams resource for the better in lots of different ways. And this is definitely a hot topic at the moment for lots of our clients.
Rick, do you want to go next?
Please.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having us. Rick Reynolds, Head of Client Services. I look after our relationship management with our RPO and MSP clients here at Omni. And we provide support and solutions to a wide range of clients in lots of different sectors through our very capable team of account directors and resourcing business partners on lots of different resourcing challenges.
Claire,
Thanks, Rick. So over to me. So I'm Claire McGuffey, so I'm one of the account directors within Omni, so really excited to speak to you all today. My role is to lead on key client accounts, and that involves the delivery, continuous improvement, and also ensuring value-added services are supplied to our clients as well.
Brill. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And you're all coming through loud and clear, which is a big relief. You accepted and got on here all right. So I feel like my work's done pretty much. So we did do a little bit of pre-planning, everybody, for today's session. There's a few areas that we're going to cover today. The first of that being what's been the biggest impact on managers because of the pandemic. A lot has changed for us all, but how's that affected managers specifically? The second area we'll explore is what's been the impact of hiring manager relationships since the pandemic. We're all operating remotely, virtually. Communication's more of a challenge. So how is that working? And then how often do we now meet or engage with our managers? How do we do that? How often? And again, what are the tips for making that work best now we're working remotely? Fourth area is what are the key strategies to support hiring managers on education, candidate experience and management and effective hiring. And then finally, what kind of training do we offer managers too? I think we'll do a little bit on video on interviews as well. So quite a lot to cover, but do please ask any questions as we go along. I did take the liberty of sending out a quick email to everybody that was joining today, and I've got a couple of pre-prepared questions that I haven't sent out to you all, so I'm going to surprise you with them a little bit later on. But I think, Louise, you're going to sort of be the MC, if you like, for this bit, and corral your team into providing answers to all the questions. So should we get cracking?
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. So we actually thought we would kick off with the third question, because when we were talking about it as a group, we just spent so long on it and it felt it was the most critical one. So the first area we were going to discuss are what are the key strategies to support hiring managers in terms of their education on candidate management and effective hiring. So we're all sometimes really mean, aren't we, to hiring managers, that in talent acquisition we do a fabulous job. The hiring manager gets involved and it can all go wrong. So it's actually really important. It's our role to make sure they're educated and they support the entire process. So Claire was just going to, I guess, kick off and share some of the strategies we're doing with some of our RPO clients, because it's so great that a lot of the work Katie and I do is we look at the best practice we do at Omni and we then go and translate that into internal talent acquisition teams. So we thought that would be a really good place to start. So Claire, over to you really, I guess, to share some of your initial ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. So I think for me, in terms of key strategies really that from client side is a big hot topic and it's growing on the agenda is diversity and inclusion. It's a huge piece of work and around supporting in terms of the hiring manager journey, but also the candidate journey as well. It's been quite a big focus for some of my clients. One in particular has been very focused on that over the last 12 to 18 months. Some of the lessons that they've learned is just really focusing on that top-down approach, really get buy-in from the top and filter that down into the business. Looking at key ambassadors throughout the business that are going to really sponsor the diversity and inclusion process and strategies and filter that right down. But it comes down to the work that we've been doing, just really quite granular level, is about the brand promotion externally. So what can we be doing to say and share about the key characteristics that we're focusing on? For us in particular, gender and ethnic minorities being a key one. But looking at that brand awareness in terms of case studies, so looking at key females, for example, in technology, and really shouting about the work that they're doing internally to break those barriers down. Not only that, then it's around getting the message out to key audiences, so looking at specific women in the area, so focusing on partnerships. So any partnerships that can focus on advertising support, newsletters to targeted people, really driving that down in terms of getting the network out there. Not only that, on the flip side, it's thinking about how we attract the candidates into the process from a manager perspective. So and making sure the managers are making an informed decision. So looking at CV anonymisation is quite a key one for us. So we've actually amended and done quite a lot of development within our system, which is one of our ATS, to look at that CV anonymisation. So it's automated. We want to take away that manual intervention for both recruiters and for the hiring managers and make them a really informed decision. So we stripped back candidate name, location, address, all your date of birth, gender references, so that using the he's and the she's and CVs that typically just come out by nature. Stripping that right back so the managers are just really making an informed decision on skills and experience alone. Driving that right through to diverse panels at interview, and just making sure you get that real rounded experience for candidates throughout the process. So strategy and just driving that down from top level is really key, but it's making sure the candidate's getting a really good experience then throughout.
Sure, Claire, you made a really interesting point then, and I tend to bang on about it a lot, the importance of leadership buy-in, stakeholder buy-in before you start any process. What are your tips on getting them on board, especially when it comes to really important areas such as ED&I?
Yeah, it's stripping it right back. So it's actually, what does the company want to achieve? And you can't just achieve it overnight. It needs to be a 12-month, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan. So you need to look at the organisation and get that buy-in right at the top from board level before you even start looking to recruit 50-50 female splits of candidates. If you can get that from the top level down, cascade it down, get your key ambassadors. So look at ambassadors across every single team, every single department, and they're almost waving that flag in advance. And it just changed that mindset, and it is constant reminders, but also training. It's that bias training, making sure that we're really focusing on supporting managers with that journey. Ultimately, it's just constant refreshing of that process, and it's not just a one-hit wonder. Almost, you can't just focus on this for a month, 3 months. It's ongoing, and it needs to be refreshed on an annual basis as well.
Great advice. I think if you're trying to swim from the bottom up through up to leadership, you're always going to struggle. But if you got that top-down sponsorship, it just makes it so much easier in terms of getting managers to buy into, whatever guidance you're looking to offer them.
Absolutely.
I was going to bring in Katie now, because Katie spends quite a lot of your time training on inclusivity, which is so much broader, isn't it, than bias. What are some of the challenges, I guess, you see, Katie, from hiring managers and getting their buy-in to this?
I think there are quite a lot of challenges, and actually from a talent acquisition point of view, and we think about not just D&I, but trying to get the hiring managers educated on a great selection process, especially in this virtual world, is really tough, and it's made our job that much more harder, I think, and it all comes back down to communication. I think going back to that initial point, Giles, for me, as well as everything that Claire has said, it's about data. You absolutely need the data to help inform whatever decisions are made. And as we know, that is the key reason to get leadership on board. And I think once you've got leadership on board, it absolutely then feeds into what Claire said around training, and training is key. Louise and I run a number of different, what we call recruitment effectiveness assessments. And one of the key areas that's coming up over the last 12 months more than ever is the education for hiring managers around the onboarding process, the offer process, as being the area that's really falling down. And that's where, again, we're seeing some of the discrepancies come in and some of the differences around that kind of diversity and inclusion as well. So it's for me, it's all about the training, the communication, and making sure that, I suppose, hiring managers feel confident in this new world to effectively select and to give them, and as a talent acquisition team function area, it is absolutely our job to give them the confidence to, effectively select. And we can only do that when we have the data to kind of help support all of that as well.
Yeah.
I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Not at all. Katie mentioned onboarding and how that quite often is where things go wrong. And obviously there's a lot around pre-boarding, onboarding as well, whether it be the compliance checks or even when people start to join the business. What are the key sticking points in your experience around onboarding?
I think one of the key sticking points is, and it seems like a really obvious one, but it's ownership. It's who owns the process, who is responsible for delivering these key messages, and actually, who's making the verbal offer, who's delivering the contracts, who's sending out the security checks, and what are the KPIs around that? And then more importantly, who's communicating with the candidate during all of that process? And often it falls down because hiring managers think it's their responsibility, talent acquisition think it's theirs, HR might think it's theirs, you've got a shared services team. And unless it's really, really clear this can be the stage, and actually we're working with a client at the moment where this is the stage that sometimes it can take 4 months almost to get a proper contract out, because there are so many different people involved in the process. And when we think about resourcing, this is probably one of the areas where we're losing most people at the moment. And so for me, even if it's just one key takeaway, it is that just clear ownership, who owns it and what timeframes are you going to work with them.
That's brilliant advice. I know that within our ATS, this isn't a job training and selling opportunity, but we have a key metric on the dashboard, which is what we call the bottleneck report, which shows which stages are causing the most issues. And quite often it is around onboarding. So I think that your advice around making sure that ownership is really clear, because quite often you are working across 3 or 4 different stakeholders, be it hiring manager or HR or whatever, or recruitment. So yeah, that's really important. Louise, what's next?
Just before we do,
sorry, Rick.
It's okay, because otherwise I'll never say it. And it's a really good point that Katie was making about lots of different people having ownership for different parts. And I think, as resourcing, it's our responsibility to pull all that together. And I think hiring managers only see certain parts of it. Your HR admin teams only see one part of it. And actually, recently we've been working with clients, and we have pulled that together into what does that look like, from offer to start, and you get a lot of surprised faces. So I think in terms of changing that behaviour, it is down to us to say, well, actually, that's what it looks like. That's what other companies are doing, and I think that's where you get that buy-in for change. Thanks, Giles.
No, thank you, Rick. Louise, over to you.
Some other things we were thinking about in terms of key strategies, and with the hiring manager in mind, we work a lot on brand. Everyone talks about their employer brand all the time, don't they? But actually, more and more so, the brand actually of the hiring managers is really important as well, because candidates are going to be checking them out on whatever social media. And a lot of the clients we work with, it's just not a consideration. They think they've nailed the employer brand. It all looks really pretty. And you go and search a manager on LinkedIn and there's just either nothing there or it's just not really representative. So we work a lot on their own personal brand as well. And I mean, gosh, I must have been talking about this for 10 years plus. And it's still an area I think managers don't necessarily buy into instinctively. They think the job is on talent acquisition to go find the candidates, not themselves and the role that they play. So I still think
going back to Katie's point, is that through lack of confidence about how to build a personal brand and how to present themselves, online or within social media?
I think so. I'll just jump in there because I think a lot of the time as well, hiring managers don't see the benefit of some of this. They don't understand exactly, as we said, their role to play in. Because as we know, candidates don't, no longer is it just a case of looking on a job board and apply for a role. There's so much more research that goes into it. But hiring managers don't necessarily see that, especially if they've been in one role or one area for a long period of time. So yeah, I think a lot of it is confidence and education from us about how important that is.
I mean, I guess if you can get them confidence and even perhaps get them to start creating some of their own content, like video content and that kind of stuff, you're working with them to do that, then that can provide a brilliant platform for demonstrating, a company brand, also personal brand. So what is it really going to be like for me to work with you, hiring manager?
It's so much more real, isn't it? When it comes from the individual as opposed to a big corporate message. So
I wasn't going to use the authentic word, but you're absolutely right, Rick.
We're all frightened of using these words anymore, aren't we? Another area where we spend a lot of time working with clients is around planning. So we always talk about, are you a reactive team, are you a proactive team? And usually people think about that as a proactive sourcing, but actually, are we really demand planning properly? So we spend a lot of time thinking about strategic workforce planning. Very few organisations do it well. We are now starting to work with organisations properly to think about the skills for the future. And it's really interesting because I think the pandemic actually has forced this conversation even more now, which is great. So there are some good things that have come out of this. And planning is certainly one of them. Thinking about the skills that companies need for the future that are different now and how are they going to get those. everyone's sometimes hiring managers, they think because there's a higher unemployment now, they just have an assumption that certain skills that were hard to fill in the past are now easier. And it's absolutely not the case, as we all know. So those skills gaps still exist, and you need longer term interventions, don't you? But I think the pandemic has enabled us to start having those conversations, and they feel more real to managers now as well, which is really good. So there definitely feels like there's been a shift. Slightly conscious I've moved on to the next question without even saying it to anybody as well. So let me ask that question. So one of the areas we pre-prepared was what has been the impact of hiring manager relationships since the beginning of the pandemic. I think Claire will be a really good person to answer this for us as well, being closer to the hiring managers we work with.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. I think for stakeholders, it's quite hard. I think a lot of people were quite traditional in this. It's traditional telephone, face-to-face meetings. Nobody had really embraced Teams or Zoom at that point. And then all of a sudden we had this big shift back in March to a remote learning. And I think that shocked a lot of people at the beginning, if I'm honest. I think there was a bit of a lull where I think stakeholders, especially from talent acquisition teams, probably had a little bit of a lull in terms of communication. Then naturally the focus was let's get the teams working remotely and let's get a laptop shipped and all of that good stuff. But I think people have adapted really, really quickly to the remote and online learning, speaking, interviews, meetings as well, because we've just not had that face-to-face contact. So I think for me, in terms of my relationships, just to bring it to my experience, really, is that my relationship probably got stronger, if I'm honest. I think we've had the less reliance on travelling, expenses, getting out nationally to meet people. You can meet more frequently. So I think from a relationship piece, it has stronger. That said, we're just not getting that face-to-face time. You don't see body language. You're not reading people the same. I can't wait personally to get back out on site and to be meeting people and just really embrace what a hybrid approach looks like, because I think it will become naturally a bit of a mix of remote video versus face-to-face meeting. I think that's a really nice complement, to be fair, moving forward. But we do need to think about the candidate experience in this, because yes, as managers, and we're all used to this remote video interviewing, but candidates might not necessarily be used to being on video all the time. So I think we need to be mindful of what the candidate experience and the candidate journey looks like, because they're almost catching up in terms of that process. So I think it's just be mindful of that.
It's a really good point, Claire. And I think from an education around managers' perspective as well, when it comes to interviews, is making them aware that candidates might be a little bit nervous, making sure that as a hiring manager, if they're running an interview, that they're providing all the information, setting all the expectation up front, so the candidate knows what they're walking into, they know how it's going to work, how it's going to play out. And also perhaps that the manager themselves, again, is being reminded of the fact that they're not in the office and corporate environment, they're in the home environment, which is great because we're being invited into each other's homes, but just making sure that they've got their own, if you like, aspect, background set up correctly. You know, perhaps for an interview, you're not going to have kids running in and out of the house, and we're going back to school now, so hopefully a bit safer, but those kinds of things, I guess it's just education, again, to give them a degree of confidence going into what is an unusual setting for everybody, even now a year on.
Yeah, meeting etiquette is so important, Giles. You're right. I think it's just managers just turn the videos off. They might still be typing away through an interview. We've probably all experienced it, but we've got to think about the candidate at the end of the day and their experience. And they want that one-to-one time, and that as they would do in a meeting room. So I think it's been really clear up front and really supporting and hand-holding the managers through that process, especially if they're not frequent hirers.
On the flip side, I think there's a potential upside here is that before lockdown, it was quite difficult for, I think, a lot of companies to control what an interview looked like. I mean, you know, we do a lot of work with construction companies and companies that have hundreds of sites and don't always have professional offices to conduct interviews in. So I think the potential upside is there's perhaps a bit more control now about what an interview should look like. And it's so much easier now to do things like panel interviews because they're all done virtually, aren't they? So I think we're not quite sure where it's going to go, are we? And I think one of the questions actually is, what's the future of, video interviewing? But I think the positive is that we could perhaps have a bit more control over hiring managers and give them more support.
Yeah, it's recruitment as well, Rick, because like I say, you can get panel interviews if people are geographically all over the country. You can pull people together really, really quickly. So time to hire, in theory, then should increase and improve on that, and the candidate getting a better experience.
Brilliant. I'm getting a little bit of feedback from central control that some of our voices are fading in and out a little bit. So what I'd ask is, if we're not talking, we just stick ourselves on mute. And if you just hover over your tiles or over your faces, there's a little toggle mic bit just to make sure. Take yourself off mute, put yourself on mute. Brilliant. Excellent. Claire, you're on. Or have you frozen on us?
Oh no, Claire's gone.
I think we might have lost Claire. We'll get her back.
Oh no. The tech was
Never
going
mind.
so well.
I know, wasn't it just? Right. What's the next area?
So I was going to ask Rick, actually, because I guess you have such a broad range of different clients and from different sectors. Have you seen any key differences depending on the types of organisations we work with in terms of that hiring manager relationship with our recruiters in particular, and how we work with them?
Lots, yes, because we work in so many different sectors. But and I'm not normally an optimist, not every day. But I think there's generally been a much stronger relationship with our clients, and I think if you look at every single one of our clients, they've all gone through some kind of crisis over the last year, like we all have, and we've been, as a resourcing function, we've been pushed to do things that we wouldn't have normally done, and we've had to have conversations and come up with solutions that we wouldn't have ever had to do before. So I think, and this is speaking very generally, I think we've cemented a much stronger relationship with our clients, in particular, probably with the more senior leaders of those organisations, because they've seen the real value. But I think it's been really positive, and I'd like to think that will continue. And I think really it's probably too early to tell what the long-term effect will be. But so far, I'm keeping my positive hat on.
It's really rare, Giles, I can assure you. I'm only joking.
She's not wrong.
So sorry, I'm back.
Welcome back.
As soon as I pressed mute, it all went, kaput.
Shall we move on to our next question, which is about when we are meeting or engaging with key stakeholders, what are you covering? What are the key top topics that you're discussing with managers? So, Claire, I think you're a perfect person, if you don't mind, for us to go to you first.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Louise. I think in terms of meetings, we're not having those water cooler moments anymore in terms of meeting and greeting. So meetings tend to be then quite focused around personal, so you have to get some structure into your meetings. It's really important that you're getting the agenda and getting everything out of what you need, but also just protecting people's time as well. We're finding now, because people aren't having those meetings, everyone's booked into meetings all the time. So it's just sticking to times in terms of it's 45 minutes, it's 45 minutes. So in terms of content of meetings, so coming back to your question, it's focusing around the day-to-day, but also in terms of the strategy side, it's bringing it back to actually that forward planning, that future thinking. So what's happening with the business area in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, where do they want to get to? And really supporting and driving that conversation rather than it just being the day-to-day delivery. We need to focus on that longer term planning and what they want to achieve, whether that's workforce planning in terms of headcount, whether that's ED&I strategies, whether that be brand awareness of the department and driving that forward. So it's really focusing on actually what do we need to move forward with and making sure that happens, rather than getting lost in what have you been up to at the weekend and all of that good stuff that you just don't get.
How about you, Katie, in terms of the challenges that we're working with? I guess I'm thinking more about the internal recruitment teams that we work with now and some of the challenges that they're faced with hiring managers. I know more recently, we used to run a course quite a lot called Stakeholder Management, didn't we? And it seems to have come as a bit of a trend again this year. It's really weird how things just do on trend. So we are being requested to support internal teams with that more and more. What other type of things are you seeing going on, Katie?
Well, I think that's a really good point, actually, that the stakeholder management piece, when we start a relationship with any client, whether internal or from an RPO point of view, you spend a lot of time mapping out who your stakeholders are and then thinking about how you engage with them, when you engage with them, at what point. And actually that has shifted a little bit now, because exactly as Claire said, we have our structured meetings, but we're missing the water cooler moments where actually you get some real gems of information and you share a lot of ideas and you miss that innovation piece. And I think internal teams are maybe missing some of that. And actually what we're finding now is we're almost having to reevaluate what our stakeholder plan looks like. So who are our true stakeholders? Because it could be, and this is a very generic example, but you didn't necessarily have a meeting with a department's PA or the support staff, but actually the relationship that you had with them wasn't formal, but it was a great relationship and they fed you information. So it's about how do you now get that information in a virtual world? So I think it's almost now, because we are going to work like this, and I agree with Rick, it'll be really interesting to see how this looks in the next 12 to 18 months in a new hybrid model, but it's not going anywhere. And actually, from our point of view, we want to keep this up because we can access so many more people. So how do we then access all of these great people that we still need to maintain a relationship with, but you can't have a formal structured meeting? And I think we're definitely finding that with internal teams, and what we're trying to work with them on is remapping who your stakeholders are and what each department is and how you engage with them. And so that you can turn some of these, let's just have a 15-minute coffee chat rather than a formal meeting, and actually let's speak at 8:30 in the morning or just after you drop the kids off, so that you can, it's just a quick chat. It doesn't have to be really formal, but I get some great pieces of information. And we're definitely seeing an increase in that, because we are having to remap and relook at, who our, as I say, stakeholders are, but also then how we influence them, because how we influence them is going to change as well.
Absolutely. I'm really conscious about talking now because you think you're on mute, don't you?
We've all been there, and how many times as well. Okay, so if I may, I was just going to dig in something you said. We talked a little bit about demand planning and even strategic planning. But I think too often with hiring managers, we get surprised by, oh yeah, well, I need a new hire. Okay, where did this come from? Well, such and such has gone on mat leave or paternity leave, or no, we've got such and such has retired from the business, and we just don't get to find out about it. So I think these more regular check-ins sometimes are an opportunity to prompt managers to think about, in 2, 3, 4, 5 months' time, who you're likely to need. And then suddenly within TA, we're not so reactive, we're not on the back foot, we're not then scrubbling around trying to fill an empty chair within an organisation with little tools or not enough budget and all those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. And that's the holy grail, isn't it? That's what we're all here to do, is try and shift from that reactive world into proactive. And again, we spend time with our clients getting them to understand that to get to a strategic workforce plan, you need an operational plan first. So we need to know exactly, as you said, who are the people that are going on maternity leave or, potentially moving internally, and what succession plans and, talent management programs do you have to help with all of this. And it is, again, that almost getting talent acquisition involved in the operational meetings, almost like your HR business partners would be. Your talent acquisition needs to be seen as a business partner, because they need to partner the business in whatever skills gap or future skills that they may need. So it is, again, that shifting mindset, isn't it, sometimes from your hiring community, that you don't just call us when there's a demand, but let's business partner with us through the whole of your kind of load and operational business, so that we understand what's happening. And again, that's, try and get yourself invited into them kind of weekly or monthly operational meetings, and kind of almost shift yourself towards in partnership with your HR business partners or people partners as well.
Brilliant advice. Thank you. Louise, over to you. Are you there, Louise? Are you with us?
Yes, I'm back. So one of the other areas we were thinking about is, I guess, really drilling down into how we select going forward, because that's the key part, isn't it, that hiring managers play. We've talked a little bit about is video hiring here to stay. It would be good, I guess, to hear about everyone's thoughts about that and how we see the projections of how that's going to change going forward. We've been running some quite complex assessment for internal restructures as well more recently, where managers are not used to assessing, and it has worked so well, even though some of the managers have been pretty, apprehensive, haven't they, really, at the beginning, Katie? What are our thoughts about the future of selection and the role of the hiring manager in terms of the video? Do you think they'll be pushing to go back face to face, or do you think they actually are quite confident now making those selection decisions? Rick, Casey, you ready to answer?
I think most people think it'd be crazy to go back to where we were because of all of the efficiencies and everything else that has come out, of introducing video interviews. And I was giving a bit of thought to this morning, and I think the bit that we miss, I think we've already touched on it, is that experience for the candidate. You don't get looked after quite as much, do you, as a candidate? If you're not going into a building and you're being offered a drink and you have the chit chat before and afterwards, and I think there's work to be done around that. But I guess my take on it is, providing we move into some more normality pretty soon, is that the first stage interview will probably remain as a virtual interview, and you'll look to complement that with perhaps a more face-to-face interview as a second stage. Of course, it's going to be different across different sectors. I'm sure that there are pieces of recruitment that only has the one stage, and what do you do there? But I think it'll be some kind of hybrid. But it would seem crazy to go back to not using it as we were before. And I think most hiring managers, whilst it was tough to start with, I've got very used to it now. So it would be a big backstep, I think, if we did that.
I think it's probably worth bearing in mind.
Can I jump in?
Oh yeah, sure, of course you can, Kate. I was going to say,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just quickly going to say, I completely agree with everything that Rick was saying, and also from a talent acquisition point of view, we don't want to limit the access to talent we now have. So it seems, like you say, just seems silly that we would then say, let's be really restrictive again. Whereas now we can literally recruit, anybody, globally, might be taking it a bit too far, but we can certainly recruit anybody across the UK for any of the roles now. So we certainly don't want to limit that in any way.
That's a really interesting one, Katie, because actually quite different across different companies. So you are seeing adverts out there, aren't you, that's saying truly can be national, but maybe needs to be in the office once a week, which you kind of get. But there are some organisations we've been working with that have a flat no. As soon as we can, we're going to go back into the office. So there's a real difference at the moment with organisations and their perceptions. What are you finding, Giles, with some of the customers that you work with and on their plans to go back?
Varied, very, very different. In terms of the last year, we've got a split camp in terms of clients that have been recruiting throughout, those in health, care, logistics, retail. But then you've got those in, hospitality and leisure and that kind of thing that really, have almost been held in aspect for the last 12 months or so, and now suddenly re-emerging. I think that there's a great opportunity here. If there are businesses out there that haven't got an open mind to recruiting nationally and therefore having people as remote workers, and they're missing out. And that is something that employers should be really showcasing and talking about. Now, I can talk from our own experience in that we hired our very first truly remote person in, Al, who joined us as a head of new business. He's based in Cornwall. He's not relocating. Bless him, he still hasn't been to visit our office. He hasn't met anybody in the team yet, apart from me, physically. But he's settled and really, really happy. Now he'll be coming up to the office every once in a while. He'll be chomping at the bit to do that, whether that's our Glasgow office or Manchester. But we're delighted to have him, and it's worked really, really well. But back to the point around onboarding, we probably had an even sharper focus on making sure we all understood our roles and responsibilities around his induction onboarding process, and making sure that he felt as much a part of the team as he possibly could be. And that fell to us as leadership within the business to make sure that that happened.
Yeah, and you can't get away without thinking about those things now. As soon as you turn up to the office, we'll sort it down. You can't do that now, can you? So I think it's a positive thing.
Absolutely. Katie, what have you seen as some of the benefits then, I guess, in terms of training managers on everything to do with selection, and then if they get it right, what business benefits are you seeing, and for the candidate, of course, as well?
I think the biggest benefit is definitely time. And I think Claire touched on it before. It's that time to hire and how quickly we can now get people in the process, keep them in the process. I also think that one of the biggest barriers we have around training hiring managers is that they don't have time. They can't get to certain locations if they're national and you're running one training course somewhere else, or sometimes people then revert just to e-learn, which perhaps isn't best for this type of training, that when you're looking at that real education piece around selection. So I think the fact that you can access so many people so quickly, you can put people through these programs in a virtual world, they can then make decisions quicker and get people involved. I think it's just the time that's the biggest thing at the moment.
Brilliant. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. I've got half an eye on the time, you see, and we're at 22. Time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? So we've got like 5 minutes left. Can I just throw a couple of questions open, Louis? I'll let you decide who's going to get put on the spot to answer them. Right, so let me dig out the questions. Obviously, it's good that I'm so well prepared on here. So the questions are from Caroline. The first one is, how can you best create gravitas in terms of building credibility with hiring managers?
I don't mind taking that one. Yeah, I think it goes back to what we touched on earlier about getting managers' attention. We talked about changing behaviours. Well, they're not going to change behaviour unless you give them a good reason to. So, and that's normally why you want that gravitas, isn't it? Is to have the desired impact. So I think you've got to put yourselves in the minds of the hiring managers or stakeholders as what is important to them. What's going to bother them. And I think there's a few simple things when it comes to changing behaviours. One is if you don't have internal SLAs, make sure you have them, because everything's measured. You can then benchmark them against their peers or other business areas, and nobody likes to be off the mark in terms of performance. The other thing is about what competitors are doing. So most hiring managers we deal with would want to know if their competitors are doing better things or attracting better people. So you have to highlight those things and give them solutions to how you can compete. And another thing is candidate feedback. You've got to think about what's valuable to them. And we talk about it a lot, don't we? The value of candidate feedback, and it's sometimes easy to get. It's easier to say than to collect really valuable feedback. But there's so much tech out there now that can make that more possible. And nothing hits home quite as much as this candidate said this about your process or your hiring manager or your interview. So I think you've got to get their attention and prove that you know what you're talking about, and then you can think about changing the behaviour.
I just think quickly to add to Rick's point is about being yourself as well. It's showing that you're a person and just building that rapport with people. We're all seeing each other's homes at the moment, so I think there's no better way for kids and dogs. And I know it's not ideal, but it does build that rapport. I know I've met quite a few of my clients' children already. So, but yeah, I think it's just being yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've got a very soggy cat outside this window. He's bashing his paws against it as we speak. He's chucking down with rain, but he's staying out. Right, one last question. So what are your tips on how to push back effectively as and when required when faced with a challenging hiring manager?
Probably Rick and I.
Yeah.
Come on, Rick.
Before I let you talk, actually, this links very nicely with the last question, which is how do you build credibility or gravitas or whatever the word was? Well, one simple way to do that is to challenge. You've got to do research. So, whether you use analytics tools or use your team to understand, what the data is telling you. And if it is about changing perspective on what's realistic, which is a lot of the challenge, a lot of the time is the types of challenges that resourcing face with hiring managers. And just you've got to call it out. Don't be afraid to call those things out. Do it professionally. But ultimately, you've got to put the problem back to the hiring manager. If you don't change something or change your opinion, then we're not going to move forward. So you have to be professional, but be direct. But that's a surefire way to build credibility with hiring managers as well.
Yeah, completely agree, Rick. I think it is about that. The stats, be prepared, and don't be afraid to challenge. There's always a solution. It's just finding that solution and working with your hiring manager in partnership to get there.
The other final thing, sorry, to just as I'm thinking, is do it in a group situation as much as you can as well. So if you're attending those monthly management meetings, they're your moments to do it, especially if you've got one particular challenging hiring manager that won't necessarily always listen, is show the room where the challenges are and what you feel that you need to do to change, and get the backing of other people to support you.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Caroline, I hope that's helped answer your questions. Great advice. There you go. Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, that kind of draws us to a close. It's a shame because I've enjoyed it so much, and thank you so much for all your brilliant advice. I hope it's been helpful for me. I hope it's been helpful for everybody else. We will follow up after this anyway with a little bit of a run through of this. Poor Laura gets that unenviable task of trying to unpick our conversations and interruptions and everything else. But thank you to all of you, and thank you to everybody for joining us for this session. We will be running more, but we're focusing more on quality, as you will have witnessed here today, rather than quantity. But we'll look forward to joining you again very soon. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great week. See you soon.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.